Welcome to Impact by DIFFA Dallas, the official podcast of the Dallas chapter of the Design Industries Foundation Fighting AIDS. We'll share valuable info about the fight against HIV and AIDS, what our organization is doing to assist those in our community, and most importantly, how you can help us make a real impact.
Thanks for tuning in to our next episode of Impact. My name is Tim Grippa. Today, I'm happy to share a topic that's really important as we approach the holidays, and it's about how to share your HIV diagnosis, or even if you should, with your family. And I'm happy to be joined by Brooke from Legacy Counseling Center. Brooke?
Hi, Tim, how are you?
I'm doing really, really well. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for bringing us to the table to have this conversation.
Yeah, of course. It's an important conversation. You know, a lot of times we talk about the breaking down stigma through conversation, but some things are really, really hard with family.
Exactly.
Before we get into that, I want us to talk a little bit about you. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself and also about Legacy?
All right. So my name is Brooke Henderson. I am the new Associate Executive Director for Legacy. I actually have been with Legacy for 9 years.
Wow.
I started out as the Program Director at Legacy Founders Cottage, the hospice, critically ill patients, caring for them, getting them healthy, or either just meeting them in the final stages of that journey as they got ready to transition to the next phase of life, which has been so rewarding. I've loved every opportunity of being able to work in the community. And as you know, Legacy does so much in the community. And
Absolutely.
One of the biggest things that we're working and doing is educating, providing housing, counseling services, as we get ready to have this conversation, what is it that we can provide and the counseling services, what that looks like. So Legacy is continuing to do telehealth services during the COVID pandemic. So it's not a barrier for any of the patients or any of the clients in the community to receive services at this time. So we ask that you really reach to us, lean on us for that support that's needed.
Yeah. Legacy and DIFFA have been partners for years.
Yeah.
So I know the impact that you guys have in the community. Thank you for everything that you do for North Texas. But let's jump into our topic today.
Yeah.
We're coming up on the holidays. Even though a lot of people are going to be home for the holidays with everything that's happening with COVID-19, it's estimated that 40% of families will still travel to go back with their families. What should people do, right? People maybe that are newly HIV positive, maybe they have been HIV positive for a while. Should they come out to their families during the holiday season? Or what's a recommendation?
So from this standpoint, one thing I want to say is that with COVID-19, a lot of us have not had the opportunity to see our families. Yeah. I know personally, it's been almost a year, and I still don't think I'll be able to be with my family. But there's this excitement when we get with our family where we can be vulnerable and we can let down our guards, and we want to do all the catching up. We want to talk about everything that's happened in the last year. And so having this conversation and teeter-tottering with the idea of sharing and disclosing is a challenge. So there's a couple of things that I think should definitely be on the forefront before really jumping and nose-diving into the conversation is, why do you want to tell them? Really think to yourself, I understand the vulnerability. I understand the support maybe that you're wanting. Yeah. But what else is it that you're looking for from them knowing your diagnosis?
Yeah.
I think the other thing is thinking about the boundaries, and how much you want to share. I think a lot of times we go into the conversation of wanting to disclose, but we're not prepared for the conversation that may follow, the questions that may be asked.
Yeah.
So kind of stop and think about those things and kind of creating a plan maybe.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things we talk about with breaking down stigma is having more conversation, is being open, because so much of stigma seems to be rooted in ignorance and not knowing. And especially so much fear is rooted in that. So if we kind of look at, is this an opportunity to break down stigma? And if so, what are the things that you should be preparing for, right? So many families maybe don't know about HIV, don't realize that it's no longer a death sentence.
Right.
What do you bring to the table if you do decide that you're going to have the conversation?
And I think that's one of the reasons why we have to go back to that plan, because you're going to have to answer some hard questions. Yeah. And it's also going to be the boundaries. We've talked about, coming out. Do they know? Is there something else that you're having to share when you tell them your diagnosis? Sure. Are you prepared to share all those pieces. And I think sometimes when we go back to the word of vulnerability, we want to share, but we want to set boundaries of how much we want to share. And the thing you have to remember in the conversation is you can't take it back.
Yeah.
And so if you sit down and you truly create the plan, and though we want to address the stigma, we want to talk about it, we want to address the fear, but you have to understand and be compassionate to the person you're sharing with, is they're going to have their own set of questions. They're going to have their own fears. They're going to have their own concerns, especially if it's somebody in your family that loves you, you're close with, and are you going to be prepared for all of that? Because it takes an emotional toll on you.
Absolutely.
And it takes an emotional toll on them.
Yeah.
So those are the challenges that you face with the disclosure, the conversation of stigma and fear. But if you have a plan, you can be a little bit more prepared for all of those things and questions that may be asked of you.
Sure. You know, we know a lot of families aren't all supportive.
Right.
Some are more supportive than others.
Right.
What happens if there's a family that really takes things negatively? Like, what should the person do in that situation?
I think one of the biggest things is seek counseling. And a lot of times people are so resistant to wanting to do counseling. And that alone has a stigma of its own, you know? But I do want to say, if you aren't ready to meet that step and take that step of counseling, reach out to the community. There's a community of individuals that care for you, AIDS organizations that are out there to provide support. It doesn't always have to be Legacy stores.
Sure.
You have Prism Health. You have the Resource Center of Dallas. So find somebody where you can connect and you can communicate and just kind of walk through that process. And see where the other resources may lie for you to get that support. Because it can be very disappointing when you don't get that support from your family. I've had patients who have come to me and not had that support. And the disappointment in their faces when they're like, well, I thought they were going to care about me. I thought they were going to be there. You know? So that's also part of that plan, being prepared.
Absolutely. And I think Legacy is fantastic. That you, as you mentioned, there's so many other ASOs that are available, right? Whether it is helping you with the plan of what information can you share, what medical information is there that you can share so that way you're talking truth. If there is rejection, if there is some sort of pushback, mental health counseling. But there's also ASOs that are providing, you know, housing for the homeless in some instances and providing other services, access to medical care. There's such a huge web and network of AIDS service organizations in the community that it feels like ASOs can really help with anything that comes.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing is you got to use the resources that are available. I know sometimes there's a hesitation for individuals because they don't want to go through the process. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for that support, that process is definitely helpful. It's genuine care on the other side of the door. And I always tell people, you know, start with your provider. If you aren't ready to go to ASO and start with the community, start with your provider and having that conversation and breaking down the stigma that, you know, you yourself may be dealing with, or just how do I deal with it when I tell my close friends or my family. Your provider will be able to share a lot of insight on how to create that plan or how to move forward or what other referrals may be available in the community if it's not so much of an organization that you want to participate in.
Sure. You know, you bring up, you know, telling your close friends. I know we talked a little bit about family and being home for the holidays, but let's pivot to friends. I mean, is the approach different? You know, is your rationale different for telling someone that's a friend versus a family member? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it has to depend on, is it an associate or is it a friend?
Sure.
And I think we kind of have to differentiate between, again, this goes back to it being your story and being careful who you share that story with, because a lot of times others may want to share your story for you. So you have to be very mindful and still guarded. You don't want to feel pressured and you want to be emotionally supported through the process. You know, things may change. And so I think you have to kind of look at all obstacles, things you've shared with your friends in the past. How did they react? Take all that into consideration before allowing your guard down and being so vulnerable to such a situation that could be so challenging for you later.
Yeah, absolutely. What can you share about where we are right now? Because I know we talked a little bit about HIV is not a death sentence.
Right.
And as part of the message that we're trying to push out through DIFFA is what is life like now? We want to make sure we're providing the right education, providing the right knowledge that, hey, there's a pill a day you can take not only to prevent contracting HIV, but also to control it so you can't pass it on to someone else.
Yeah.
What interesting facts can you provide around, what should people know about HIV? Maybe people that aren't diagnosed yet, but just some interesting facts for the community.
One, let's start with know your status.
Yeah.
Let's get tested. Let's go back to the basics of this whole conversation is, do you know your status? We want to have the conversation about HIV and AIDS and where we are, but a lot of people can't even start with their status because they're scared. It is a little nerve-wracking, but I mean, you would rather know than not know. So starting there, that's one thing. Second thing is, it is so amazing. I've been in the field for 14 years in HIV and AIDS. I worked for another AIDS organization, Health Services of North Texas, before coming to Legacy. And seeing patients who have been diagnosed for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And the first thing they think when they get a diagnosis is, my life is over. And then working in hospice and seeing people walk through the door and thinking they have no hope.
Yeah.
And giving them that sense of hope and seeing them live with the diagnosis. Right now, you versus you, we're talking about undetectability. But what does it mean to be undetectable?
Sure.
I think there's a confusion sometimes with what it means to be undetectable. It means I don't have it anymore. So I think we still have to continue to start the conversation of what it means to be undetectable, what it means to be tested and know your status. I think all of those things are a big thing. But then the other part of it is the medication and how it's come along. 1 pill a day, and some people, coming from a case manager standpoint, let me say this. Patients may come through the door and they're like, well, why don't I get that 1 pill a day? Work with your providers. You may not be eligible or be ready to be on a 1 pill a day. There's so many different things that go into you getting on 1 pill a day.
Sure.
So I always want to say, keep the conversation going with your provider.
Yeah.
Questions, ask them. Take the time to educate yourself. Advocate for yourself at your doctor's appointments and say, hey, I heard that this may work better for me. But then if your doctor's resistant, if your doctor's not ready to start you on this 1 pill therapy, get a clear understanding of what it would take to get there.
Sure.
So it's all about advocating for yourself. It's having the conversation and just being prepared for what's to come. And then choosing carefully who you decide you want to have those conversations with.
All good points. Things have changed so much since the 80s.
Yeah.
From a cocktail of pills to really medication has come a long, long way.
Yes.
I think the point getting tested, you've got to know your status.
Yeah.
And there's no financial hurdle. There are so many places you can go to get your status, and you can get it for free.
Yeah.
So bring a friend. Right?
Yeah.
Bring a friend. Go with somebody. It's that first time. It's getting there that's the hardest part. The actual test is not a problem. So any final thoughts from you?
We are just grateful to be here, but I do want to just explain to any and everybody that may be at the forefront of deciding, do I share? Think for one moment, close your eyes and just ask yourself and remember how you felt when you found out about your own diagnosis. For that moment, sit with it for a moment, resonate with it for a moment, and think, the person I share this with, they have to go through a process because you too had to go through a process. Be compassionate to the person you choose to share your story with and give them time to accept it, and then be prepared for whatever may come, the good or the bad, but also know there's a support system out there and you're not alone. You don't have to walk through this alone. So please make sure you reach out to us, whether it's Legacy or any other organization that can help you through the next steps.
Awesome. Brooke, great message. Everyone's on a journey.
Yes.
Individuals, people you tell. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you and Legacy do for the community. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Impact. You can find more information on our website at diffadallas.org. We'll see you next time.